Your place is in the trash! My daughter Susan screamed as she shoved me toward the door of my own condo. That yellow sticky note she slapped on my kitchen counter hit me harder than her words. I'm sick of you, you useless old man. This place is sold. Pack your things and welcome to the trash heap. I'm Howard Wilson. I'm 67 years old, and I spent 35 years as a Detroit police officer. I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal, every kind of cruelty people could dish out. I was wrong. February 15th, 2026. That's the day my world turned upside down. I'd just gotten back from my doctor's appointment, another lecture about managing my type 2 diabetes, checking blood sugar levels every 4 hours, taking my metformin religiously. The same routine I'd been following for 3 years since Margaret, my wife of 40 years, passed away from ovarian cancer. I walked into my kitchen expecting the usual quiet that had become my life since retirement. Instead, I found chaos. Boxes everywhere, my belongings scattered around like evidence at a crime scene. And Susan, my baby girl, the daughter I'd worked double shifts to put through Wayne State University, standing there with her arms crossed and pure hatred burning in her eyes. "What the hell is going on here?" I asked, setting down my medication bag on the counter. That's when she hit me with it. The house was sold. The closing was Monday, just 3 days away. She'd been stealing my money for months, and now she wanted me gone so the new buyers could move in immediately. I stared at that note she'd stuck to my counter. In Susan's rushed handwriting, it said exactly what she'd screamed at me. But at the bottom, she'd written something else that made my blood run cold. "Riverside Senior Care is expecting you. $800 a month. I paid for 2 months up front. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Dad." Riverside Senior Care. Jesus Christ, I knew that place. My old partner Ronald Baker and I had arrested the manager there 5 years ago for patient neglect. Elderly residents left in their own filth, medication errors that killed 3 people, food that wasn't fit for stray dogs. It was basically a warehouse where families dumped their elderly relatives to die slowly and forgotten. "Susan," I said, keeping my voice steady the way I'd learned to do when questioning suspects. "This is my home. I bought this place with my pension money after your mother died. You can't just sell it?" She laughed. Actually laughed, like I'd told her a joke. "Dad, you signed the papers 6 months ago. You don't remember because of your little sugar episodes. You gave me power of attorney to handle all your finances when you got too confused to manage them yourself." That hit me like a physical blow. I'd never signed any papers giving her power of attorney. And while my diabetes sometimes made me shaky and foggy, especially when my blood sugar dropped too low, I wasn't some senile old man who forgot major life decisions. Reached into my jacket for my phone to call my bank. Dead battery. Of course. "Don't bother," Susan said, watching me fumble with the phone. "I've already handled everything through the bank's online system. The money from the sale will go into a managed trust account for your long-term care. You'll be comfortable at Riverside." Comfortable. In a place where I'd seen elderly people with bed sores so deep you could see bone. I looked at my daughter. Really looked at her for the first time in months. She was 38 years old, still pretty like her mother had been at that age. But there was something in her face I'd never seen before. Something cold and calculating that reminded me of the white-collar criminals I'd arrested during my years in financial crimes. She was wearing new clothes, expensive ones, designer jeans that probably cost $200, a leather jacket that looked like it came from some upscale boutique, not the discount stores where she usually shopped. Her hair was freshly cut and styled. Even her nails were professionally done. "Where's Timothy?" I asked about her ex-husband, though I had a feeling I already knew the answer. "He stopped paying child support 8 months ago," she said, not meeting my eyes anymore. "Moved to Phoenix with his new girlfriend. I've got $15,000 in legal bills from the custody fight, Dad. The kids need stability, a decent place to live. You understand how it is." That's when the pieces started clicking into place, the way they used to during investigations. Susan had been coming around more often lately, supposedly helping me with my finances. She'd set up online banking for me, organized automatic bill payments, even helped me understand my investment statements. Every time I had a bad day with my diabetes, when my blood sugar would crash and leave me shaky and confused for an hour or two, she'd be there with her laptop, taking care of things while I recovered. I'd trusted her completely. After Margaret died, Susan and my granddaughter Carol were all I had left in the world. Susan had made me feel like she cared, like she was looking out for her old man who was struggling to adjust to life alone. But standing there in my kitchen, surrounded by boxes and looking at that hateful note, I realized the truth that should have been obvious to a cop with 35 years of experience. I wasn't a father to her anymore. I was a mark, a target, a resource to be harvested before I became inconvenient. "Get out," Susan said suddenly, her voice flat and cold. "The movers come tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. for whatever I'm keeping. Everything else goes to Goodwill." I bent down and picked up the small suitcase she'd packed for me. Inside were 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, my diabetes medication, and a single photo of Margaret from our wedding day. Not even the nice, silver-framed one from our bedroom, just a cheap drugstore print. 35 years of police service, 40 years of marriage, 67 years of living, reduced to one beat-up suitcase that probably came from her garage. But what really got to me was seeing my gun case sitting on top of a box marked "Donate" in Susan's handwriting. Empty. She'd even taken my service weapon, the Smith & Wesson .38 Special I'd carried for 25 years, the one that had saved my life in an alley behind Tiger Stadium back in '98. The gun that was legally mine, properly registered, with sentimental value that couldn't be measured in dollars. That's when something clicked inside my head. Not angry rage, professional focus. The same cold clarity I'd felt when working major cases, when all the evidence suddenly formed a pattern, and I knew exactly what kind of criminal I was dealing with. I pulled out my pen, the same black Bic I'd used to write thousands of police reports over 3 decades, and turned that yellow sticky note over. On the blank side, I wrote 2 words in my careful block letters. "Wrong move." I stuck it back on the counter, where she'd see it the moment I walked out. "What's that supposed to mean?" Susan asked, but I could hear uncertainty creeping into her voice for the first time. I looked at my daughter one last time, memorizing her face the way I'd been trained to memorize suspects. "You'll find out, sweetheart. You definitely will." Then I walked out of my own home into the February Detroit cold, carrying everything I supposedly had left in one small suitcase. The Riverside Senior Care Facility was exactly as horrifying as I remembered. The lobby smelled like industrial disinfectant, trying to mask the stench of urine and despair. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, barely looked up from her phone when I walked in. "Howard Wilson," I said. "I think my daughter made arrangements." She tapped her keyboard with long, fake nails. "Room 237, 2nd floor. Elevator's broken, so you'll have to take the stairs. Dinner's at 5 p.m. sharp. Miss it, you don't eat." Room 237 was a nightmare. Too narrow, beds separated by a thin curtain, one broken heater that rattled like a diesel engine but produced no actual heat, and a roommate named George who spent his days staring at a TV that only picked up 3 channels through the static. "They feed us dog food here," George whispered to me within 10 minutes of my arrival. Literally, I read the labels. Same ingredients as Alpo. The bathroom was down the hall, shared by 8 residents. The shower had black mold growing in the corners, and no hot water after 3 p.m. The staff treated us like we were already dead, just taking up space until they could clean out the rooms for fresh victims. But Susan had made one critical mistake. She assumed I was just another helpless old man who'd quietly accept whatever fate she'd arranged for me. She forgot I was a Detroit cop with 35 years of experience investigating fraud, embezzlement, and con artists. And now I'd become the victim of the biggest con of my career. The first thing I did was plug my phone into the wall outlet and call my old partner, Detective Ronald Baker. Ron had transferred to financial crimes during his last 8 years on the force before retiring. If anyone could help me understand what Susan had done, it was him. "Howard, Jesus Christ, where the hell have you been?" Ron said when he answered after the third ring. "Linda's been trying to reach you for weeks. There's some seriously weird shit happening with your bank accounts." Ron's wife, Linda, worked as a senior analyst at Detroit Municipal Credit Union, where I'd kept my savings for 20 years. Turns out she'd been monitoring unusual activity on my account since December. Large transfers happening at 2 and 3 in the morning, online banking sessions from IP, addresses that didn't match my home computer, transactions that looked nothing like my normal spending patterns. "She tried calling you multiple times," Ron explained, "but the phone number in their system had been changed. Instead of your cell, it was routing to some number that went straight to voicemail." "Susan's number," I said, the picture becoming clearer. "How much are we talking about, Ron?" "Howard, you need to sit down. And I mean that literally." Over the next hour, sitting on that moldy bed in Riverside, while George watched game shows with the volume cranked to maximum, Ron walked me through the systematic destruction of my financial life. Susan had used her position as a senior teller at Wells Fargo to access my accounts through their internal banking system. Every time I had a diabetes episode and got confused or shaky, she'd been logging into my online banking using credentials she'd set up herself. She'd transfer money to checking accounts she'd opened in my name at different banks, then move the money again to her personal accounts. She'd created fake medical bills for treatments I'd never received, home health care services from companies that didn't exist, specialist consultations with doctors who'd been dead for 5 years, physical therapy sessions, medical equipment rentals, prescription costs, all fake, all paid from my savings. The total damage, $180,000. Everything I'd saved from 35 years of police work, every penny Margaret and I had put away for our retirement, every dollar I'd planned to leave to Carol for her college education. "There's more," Ron said grimly. "She's been doing this to other people too." Linda flagged 3 other elderly accounts with the same pattern, all customers who had adult children working at local banks. My granddaughter Carol. That's what this was really about. Susan was facing a custody battle with Timothy, and she needed money fast. Not just for legal fees, but to prove she could provide a stable home for Carol. Child Services had been sniffing around after neighbors reported shouting matches and police visits to Susan's apartment. But here's what Susan didn't understand about her old man. I might be 67 with diabetes, but I still had every skill I'd learned in 3 decades of police work. And I had something she'd never expected, a network of law enforcement contacts who took care of their own. Within 2 hours of that phone call with Ron, I had connections reaching into the FBI, the State Police Financial Crimes Unit, and banking security departments throughout Michigan. Susan thought she was dealing with a confused old diabetic who'd quietly disappear into a nursing home and never cause her trouble. She had no idea what she'd just started. Ron didn't waste any time. By 6 a.m. the next morning, he was at Riverside with coffee, donuts, and a briefcase full of documents that would have made any prosecutor smile. "Linda pulled the complete banking records," he said, spreading papers across the little table in the common room, while the other residents stared at us like we were conducting some kind of drug deal. "Your daughter's been busy, Howard. Real busy." The records painted a picture of systematic theft that would have impressed the fraud detectives I used to work with. Susan hadn't just stolen money randomly. She'd studied my spending patterns for months, timing her thefts to coincide with my diabetes episodes when she knew I'd be confused and disoriented. December 3rd. $15,000 transfer at 2:47 a.m. for emergency medical equipment. I'd been in the ER that night with a blood sugar crash that left me unconscious for 3 hours. December 18th. $22,000 for specialized diabetes treatment program. I'd had another episode that afternoon and been too shaky to even answer the phone for hours. January 9th. $31,000 for home modification for medical accessibility. Another bad diabetes day, where Susan had come over to help while I recovered. She's not just stealing from you, Ron said grimly. Linda found similar patterns in accounts belonging to Harold Peterson, age 73, heart patient, Catherine Meyer, age 69, early-stage dementia, and George Franklin, age 81, recovering from a stroke. All of them had adult children working at Wells Fargo or other local banks. Jesus Christ, I muttered. It's a whole operation. Gets worse. Linda called the FBI yesterday. Agent Linda Washington from the Financial Crimes Division is driving up from the Detroit field office this morning. She wants to meet with you. FBI Special Agent Linda Washington turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who reminded me of the best detectives I'd worked with. Thorough, professional, and quietly furious about criminals who targeted vulnerable people. We met at a McDonald's near the interstate, far from Riverside, and away from any place Susan might spot us together. Agent Washington had thick files on banking fraud cases and a personal stake in elder abuse investigations that went back to her own family. "Mr. Wilson," she said after we'd found a corner booth, "your daughter made some serious mistakes. Banking fraud across state lines puts this in federal jurisdiction, using her position at Wells Fargo to access customer accounts makes it embezzlement, and targeting elderly victims with medical conditions adds elder abuse charges. We're looking at 15 to 20 years minimum if we can prove intent and pattern." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Your cooperation in a sting operation. We want to record her confessing to the thefts, but it has to be done exactly right, or the evidence gets thrown out in court." The plan was simple, but required precise timing. I'd call Susan and tell her I was confused about some bank statements that had been forwarded to me at Riverside. I'd ask her to come explain them to me, supposedly because my diabetes brain fog was making it hard to understand the numbers. We'd wire me with a recording device. Agent Washington and Ron would be in the next room, listening to everything. Susan would come thinking she was dealing with a confused old man who needed her help covering up her crimes. "She'll try to gaslight you," Agent Washington warned. "Make, you think you're remembering things wrong, that you authorized the transfers during your medical episodes. Stay calm, let her talk, ask simple questions. The more she explains, the deeper she digs her own grave." I called Susan that afternoon from the payphone in Riverside's lobby, the only phone in the building that actually worked reliably. "Dad? Jesus, I've been worried sick. How are you settling in?" "I'm okay, sweetheart," I said, making my voice sound older and more tired than I felt. "But I'm confused about some papers they forwarded here from the bank. Can you come help me understand them?" "What kind of papers?" "Bank statements. Lots of transfers I don't remember. The nurse here says maybe my diabetes episodes made me forget. But some of these numbers seem really big." Silence on the other end. Then, "Dad, you know how your blood sugar crashes affect your memory. We talked about all those medical expenses, the treatments, the equipment you needed." "I know, honey, but could you come look at them with me? I trust you to explain what happened. My brain gets so foggy sometimes." "Of course, Dad. I'll drive over this evening after work." "And Dad? Don't worry about the money stuff. I'm handling everything for you." She arrived at 7 p.m., right after the dinner shift when most residents were dozing in front of the lobby TV. I met her at the front desk wearing the wire Agent Washington had taped to my chest that afternoon. Susan looked nervous, I noticed. She kept checking her phone, glancing around the lobby like she was worried about being watched. She'd lost weight since I'd seen her a week ago, and her expensive clothes couldn't hide the stress lines around her eyes. "Hi, Dad," she said, giving me a quick hug that felt forced. "Where are these statements you wanted me to look at?" I led her to the small family meeting room, where Agent Washington and Ron were positioned in the maintenance closet next door, listening through the thin walls. "Here," I said, spreading out the bank statements Ron had printed. "These transfers, I don't remember authorizing most of them." Susan sat down and immediately went into explanation mode, just like Agent Washington had predicted. "Dad, this one was for the diabetes monitoring system Dr. Rodriguez recommended. Remember? You were having trouble keeping track of your blood sugar levels." $15,000 for a blood sugar monitor? It was the premium package, the one that connects to your phone and calls 911 automatically if your levels get dangerous. You said you wanted the best protection available. I didn't remember any Dr. Rodriguez. I'd been seeing the same endocrinologist, Dr. Patricia Foster, for 5 years. "And this one? $22,000? The dietary consultation program. The nutritionist who came to your house twice a week to help you plan diabetic meals and monitor your glucose response to different foods." No nutritionist had ever come to my house. "This $31,000 transfer?" Susan Eintor hesitated for just a moment. "The bathroom renovation, installing grab bars, a walk-in shower, non-slip flooring, all medically necessary modifications for fall prevention. I'd never had any renovation done to my bathroom." "Susan," I said quietly, "I went to my bathroom this morning before I moved out. Nothing had been changed. Same old shower, same old everything." Her face went pale. "Dad, your memory, the diabetes episodes. You're confused about the timeline." "No, sweetheart," I said. "I'm not confused at all. I know exactly what happened to my money." That's when Susan's face crumpled. The confident explanation died on her lips, and for a moment I saw my little girl again, the one who used to cry when she broke something and tried to hide it from her parents. "Dad, please," she whispered. "I can explain everything. Timothy stopped paying child support 8 months ago. I was facing eviction. Carol needed school clothes, medical checkups, groceries. I was desperate." "So, you decided to steal from your father?" "I was going to pay it back. Once I got the promotion at Wells Fargo, once Timothy started paying again, once things stabilized, I just needed time." That's when Agent Washington and Ron walked through the door, badges visible. "Susan Wilson Martinez," Agent Washington said formally, "you're under arrest for bank fraud, wire fraud, elder financial abuse, and embezzlement." Susan's face went white as Agent Washington read her Miranda rights. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists, and suddenly my daughter looked very small and very young. "Dad, please," she said as they led her toward the door. "What about Carol? She needs me." "She needed her mother," I replied. "Instead, she got a thief." The look Susan gave me as they walked her out wasn't hatred anymore. It was fear. Pure, desperate fear about what she'd thrown away for $180,000. The investigation and trial took 4 months. During that time, I learned things about my daughter that broke what was left of my heart. The Wells Fargo internal investigation revealed she'd been skimming from elderly customer accounts for over a year. The amounts were small at first, $200 here, $500 there, but gradually escalated as her personal financial crisis deepened. She owed $27,000 in credit card debt, $15,000 in legal fees from the custody battle, and $8,000 in back rent. Her car was 2 months behind on payments. Carol's school had sent multiple notices about unpaid lunch accounts and overdue fees, but what really got to me was discovering she'd been researching elder abuse tactics online. Browser history from her laptop showed dozens of websites about how to exploit elderly relatives, how to avoid detection when stealing from seniors with memory problems, even forums where people shared tips about targeting diabetics during blood sugar episodes. This wasn't a desperate mother making a panicked mistake. This was calculated, premeditated theft from her own father. The trial lasted 3 days. Susan's public defender tried to paint her as a struggling single mother driven to desperation by an unforgiving system. The federal prosecutor showed the jury banking records, security footage of Susan accessing customer accounts after hours, and my recorded confession where she admitted to stealing money for fake medical expenses. Judge Beverly Coleman had seen enough elder abuse cases to recognize the pattern. "Ms. Martinez," she said during sentencing, "you systematically exploited your father's medical condition to steal his life savings. You used your position at a financial institution to prey on vulnerable elderly customers. You planned to abandon your diabetic father in a substandard care facility while you lived off his stolen money." Susan's sentence: 18 months in federal prison, 5 years supervised probation, permanent ban from working in banking, and full restitution of $180,000 at $1,200 per month until paid in full. That restitution schedule meant Susan would be paying me back for the next 12 years of her life. Getting my money back took another 3 months. The FBI had frozen Susan's accounts the day they arrested her, but she'd already spent $47,000 on legal fees, debt payments, and living expenses. Asset forfeiture recovered about $23,000 from her car and personal belongings. Wells Fargo paid $110,000 from their employee theft insurance fund rather than face a civil lawsuit. More importantly, Child Protective Services contacted me about Carol. Timothy had moved to Phoenix and wasn't interested in custody. Susan's parents, Margaret's brother and his wife, were both dead. I was Carol's only viable relative. At 67 years old, I suddenly found myself raising a 12-year-old girl. Carol Wilson was smart, resilient, and angry about what her mother had done. She'd been living with neighbors since Susan's arrest, bouncing between temporary guardians who treated her like a burden. When I picked her up from her latest foster placement, she had everything she owned stuffed into 2 garbage bags. "Are you going to send me away too?" she asked on the drive to my new apartment. "Not a chance, kiddo," I told her. "You're stuck with your old grandpa." We found a 2-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood near her school. Carol got her own room, which she decorated with purple everything because that was her favorite color. I helped her with homework, taught her to cook basic meals, and made sure she understood the difference between right and wrong in ways her mother apparently never had. Living with Carol changed everything for me. Suddenly, I had a reason to manage my diabetes properly, to stay healthy, to plan for a future that extended beyond just my own needs. She was smart, funny, and reminded me so much of Margaret at that age that sometimes it took my breath away. Susan got out of prison after 14 months with good behavior credit. The first thing she did was request supervised visitation with Carol. The family court judge allowed it. 2 hours every other Saturday, with a social worker present. Those visits are still awkward as hell. Susan and I barely speak to each other. There's too much damage, too much betrayal to pretend everything's normal. But Carol loves her mother, despite everything, and I won't be the one to destroy that relationship completely. Susan found work as a receptionist at a medical clinic, one of the few jobs available to someone with her criminal record. Every month, like clockwork, I get a $1,200 check in the mail. No note, no phone call, just the restitution payment that reminds us both of her wrong move. My name is Howard Wilson. I'm 69 years old now, and 2 years ago my daughter tried to steal everything I'd worked 35 years to build. She locked me out of my own home and threw me away like garbage, thinking I was just another helpless old diabetic who'd quietly disappear. She was wrong. Dead wrong. That note I left her? Wrong move? Every month when she writes that restitution check, she remembers exactly what I meant. These days, Carol and I are doing fine. She's 14 now, getting straight A's, and talking about studying criminal justice in college. Maybe she'll be a cop like her grandfather. Maybe she'll be a prosecutor who protects people like I wasn't able to protect myself. Either way, she's learned that family should protect each other, not prey on each other. And that's worth more than the $180,000 her mother stole. That's justice. Detroit police style. 35 years of police work taught me that criminals always underestimate their victims, and family criminals are the most arrogant of all. Trust can be broken, but respect has to be earned back one payment at a time, and some debts take a lifetime to settle.